Testing. All right. Make sure I got what I need on my computer here. Okay. How you doing, Instagram? Thanks for joining. I'm a little late. I thought I would be in here at 11 on the dot, but I'm close enough, I guess. Close enough. Of course, the quality of the presentation is better. Of course, on YouTube, I live stream from Instagram because I'm still trying to build my YouTube subscribership up a little bit, and then from there, then maybe I'll transition over and start doing some live streams on YouTube. But I'm trying to crack that. I'm trying to crack 1K. I'm getting there. I'm a few away. I anticipate being over 1,000 subscribers maybe within the next couple of weeks. We'll see after this video drops. I'm quite enthusiastic because I was surprised at the amount of engagement and views that I received on my last upload. I didn't really think as many people would be interested in this Barack Obama topic, but I guess I was wrong. So I appreciate you guys for showing me that love. I think it's my last upload on Obama. I think it got the second most views of any of my videos thus far. I think right behind the video I did on homosexuality and communism. People like the LGBT topic thing. It kind of gets people going. So yeah, that was an easy one. I saw that coming. Before we get started, I want to issue an apology. You all, I kind of fibbed last time I was here, and I'm going to tell you guys what I meant. Just bear with me. I'm going to tell you what I fibbed about. So let's get into and people have been asking me, what do I think about the Alabama boat brawl? What are my thoughts? What do I think about it? Well, I don't, and that's that. I expect the left to do what the left does. I expect the left to be stupid. I am really shocked, though. I can't necessarily say I'm shocked because the truth of the matter is, at least in my opinion, that quote-unquote conservative content creation on social media has, in fact, become a grift for many of you. And that's just the way it is. But you won't hear that sort of thing from me. You just won't. And so I don't think about that. And if you are in any way fixated on it as someone who considers themselves to be a conservative, then shame on you. And so let's move on into something substantive, something real, something that, is actually gratifying and edifying for the mind. You won't get any of that petty stuff over here. House cleaning, first and foremost, going back to some of the things that I talked about before. I like to try and circle back and kind of clean up in some of my errors. Shout out to my friend Kiana Shaw. She'll probably see this video at some point. She's sort of like, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, but she's kind of like almost like my secretary. She'll come up and she'll call me out in the comment section of some of my videos and like, Chuck, that's incorrect. Everybody, the greatest, and I'm not putting myself on any type of pedestal. Of course, I'm being self-deprecating in a non-serious sort of a way. But even Justice Clarence Thomas and others, even they need legal clerks and folks like that to come behind them. And, you know, every great mind like a Thomas Sowell has a research team. And so, you know, sometimes I do make mistakes, so I like to correct my errors. So let's go through some house cleaning from last time. I mentioned the NLF, the National Liberation Front, in connection with the Algerian Revolution. That a man by the name of Frantz Fanon, who was a favorite of Barack Obama while in college, and I drew the connection between the Algerian Revolution and the Vietnamese Revolution. And I talked about the National Liberation Front and the Viet Minh. If you study the politics of Indochina from the 1930s up until the Vietnam War, it is very, I guess, sort of tricky and complicated because these political organs in that particular region of the world underwent a ton of changes and mutations, and that's why it's a bit hard to keep track of what's going on, and they do this quite deliberately because this is a part of their popular front tactics. But let me just provide you all with a further detail into the National Liberation Front. So the National Liberation Front, it wasn't just a communist organization. Again, this is why they call it a front, because you'll have communists within the coalition who are actually steering and directing, right, the efforts of the group, and those who are not communists are never the wiser. They're simply providing cover for the communists that are actually directing the efforts of the entire group. And yeah, we see them operate like this in America. They've done so in America historically, and they're still doing so in America today. Communists love to align themselves with self-styled and self-described liberals and progressives. Are progressives and liberals always communists? No, they're not. But more often than not, these folks are being played for the fools, or the morally they're morally cowardice, quite frankly. And so they are ripe for this kind of manipulation. So the National Liberation Front, which included non-communists, was formed in 1960 by the Central Committee of the Communist Party. That is an exclusively a Russian operation, right? Its military arm was officially named the People's Liberation Armed Forces, the PLAF, which became more widely known as the Viet Cong. Now, the Viet Minh was separate from the NLF. This is what I said last time. I said that the NLF was sort of like another name for the Viet Minh. That's not entirely true. The Viet Minh was formed in China, as point of fact, in May of 1941 by Ho Chi Minh. The predecessor to the Viet Minh was the Indochina Communist Party, which was formed in 1930 by Ho Chi Minh, because the original goal was to liberate all of French Indochina and turn the entire region, to convert the entire region into a Soviet client state. That would include Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and even Thailand. But, you know, communism didn't really flourish and flow into Thailand as they had wished. And the man who I alluded to in part one of this talk, whose name I couldn't recall at the time, who was a Soviet Comintern agent, he was the one who tipped the first domino in Southeast Asia. I couldn't remember his name, but I went back and I was able to uncover it, or remind myself of it, and I'm bringing it to you guys now. That man's name, if you're interested in researching the life of this man, his name is Mikhail Borodin. Mikhail Borodin. Just to give you a brief on Mikhail Borodin, he was a chief Comintern agent who was sent into China in the 1920s and helped plant the seed of communism in East and Southeast Asia. Borodin, in 1906, this was an interesting factoid I found on Borodin. In 1906, he immigrated to the United States, where he attended Valparaiso University in Indiana and founded a school for Soviet defectors. In 1949, when Stalin began a purge of Soviet Russia's Jewish intellectuals, Borodin was arrested and sent to a labor camp in Siberia, where he died just a few years later. So that's the fate and the life. What's up, Musical Fury? That's the fate and the life of Mikhail Borodin. Pardon me, Instagram, if I'm not reading you guys' comments and seeing some of the shout outs. What's up to everybody in the chat on Instagram? You know, again, Instagram, you know, when hope go subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you don't feel like running it back and watching this again, at least shoot your boy a like or a comment or something so we can try to fight the algorithm. The Democratic Republic of the Congo. I said that the Democratic Republic of the Congo was once the called, you know, the Congo, because I talked about Patrice Lumumba before. And I connected Zimbabwe with the Congo. Again, many of you all pick up on these things because you all are just as smart as I am, so you know what I mean or know what I'm getting at when I say a lot of things. But again, you know, we have to sort of fight against our detractors out there because they look for. I mean, we aren't going to be perfect, right? But your enemies look for fissures, for openings to try and discredit you and claim that you don't know what you're talking about. When you make these things that are comparable to like a typo or something clerical, but I'll go back anyway. So the Democratic Republic of the Congo, of course, was not Zimbabwe. It was never Zimbabwe. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is still the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Of course, it won its independence from Belgium in 1960. And the Democratic Republic of the Congo has been communist was communist from the day of its independence until the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. Zimbabwe was, of course, the former Rhodesia. I just did, or Rhodesia, pronounce it how you like. I just yesterday I did a live. I was on my friend, is a fellow YouTuber named Sub-Zero. I'm trying to remember exactly what his YouTube channel is called, so you can find it, because if you go on YouTube and of course you just type Sub-Zero, you're gonna get a bunch of content about the video game Mortal Kombat. But yeah, I think if you look at some of my recent stories on Instagram, I posted about it, and we did an entire talk on the topic was, did Africa civilize the West? And a lot of times, like, you know, before, like last time, I was kind of going off into little tangents about colonialism and how the West did, in fact, not only civilize Africa, but it civilized the world. And so that upset a lot of people. And so I went on my friend Sub-Zero's YouTube channel to unpack a lot of that. And, you know, it's funny, and I mentioned this yesterday when I was on his channel about, you know, the hypocrisy when it comes to, you know, this sort of selective outrage, you know, when it comes to, you know, some of the things or some of the individuals in particular that have helped to run down, you know, these various African countries. And there is no worse leader in the history of post-colonial Africa, arguably, than Robert Mugabe. Again, you know, we talked about Cecil Rhodes, you know, Rhodesia, which became Zimbabwe. But it's quite strange to me how Robert Mugabe is not criticized by these left-wing intellectuals as much as someone like a Cecil Rhodes, who was not a perfect man, but is widely misunderstood by today's modern intellectual. Cecil Rhodes was a net positive, was a net benefit for the peoples of Africa. And, you know, as the old saying goes, he was a man of his time. But Cecil Rhodes was a great man for his time. I said, too, that, you know, with the episode when Frank Marshall Davis was, there was an attempted lynching of Frank Marshall Davis when he was 5 years old. Of course, I said a white stranger saved his life and escorted him the rest of the way home. I said they walked 5 miles, but it was only a 1 mile walk, according to Davis, not a 5 mile walk. And of course, I talked about the Montgomery bus boycott, which occurred in 1955. And I talked about the march that happened in 65. Again, the boycott was 55. The marches were in 65, and those marches occurred from Selma to Montgomery. I don't know why I had Birmingham on the brain, but anyway. And James Ford, the black communist, he was You know, he was one of the founders of the National Negro Congress, which was founded in the city of Chicago. He was a Communist Party candidate for vice president in 1932, 36, and 1940. I said 1931. I don't know why I said that when I meant to say 1932. Of course, you know, the general election does not take place on odd years. Perhaps the primary, but anyway, he was the candidate for president for the Communist Party, and the chief editor of The God Who Failed: A Confession. If you're interested, his name is Richard Crossman, not Grossman. I think I called him Grossman. His name is Richard Crossman. And the Republican Party candidate for president in 1940 that Frank Marshall Davis campaigned for was Wendell Willkie, not William Willkie. Again, I was going off memory. I called him William. His name is Wendell. All right. Now that we got that out the way, let's get into it. Now, before I start, let me tell you guys what I lied to you guys about. All right. I lied to you guys and told you all that this was going to be a 2-part discussion. Well, I lied because it looks like it's going to be a 3-part discussion, right? I got to a certain point and I said, this is getting too long, man, but I'm still not finished. What am I going to do? Well, all right, we'll make it 3 parts. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just leave it where I'm done here. When I'm done here, that's it. And, you know, but you all let me know in the comment section on YouTube if you want to hear more of what I have to say about Obama and the people around him. Mind you, you all have been paying attention. I'm going like one, you know, just multiple 3 and 4 degrees of separation from Obama. Even talking about, you know, people who, you know, who died before the man was, you know, even born, you know, because, you know, anyway, I like to do that. And so, but you all let me know if this content, if you're interested in this, then maybe I'll continue on to do part 3 because there is more that I wanted to discuss that I didn't get to, but this was getting, it was just getting way too long. So I said, all right, it's going to have to be 3 parts. So y'all let me know, man. My boy said he wanted 3rd. Okay. And like I said, this got a lot of views on YouTube, so I take it you guys are interested. And you guys go check out my partner, my homeboy. He is Blanchard. Coincidentally, I don't know if I inspired it or whatever. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But he just did he was on YouTube last night, and he did a live stream called "Is Obama the Antichrist?" I've watched some of it at this moment as I'm speaking. I haven't had a chance to finish the rest of it, but you all can go check that out. I told you all last time, like for me, you know, I'm familiar with all of the rumors. You know, we're talking Obama's, you know, his citizenship and you know, all these things, rumors swirling about his sexuality. Is his wife really a man? And blah, 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 right? I told you guys I'm familiar with all that stuff. But, you know, for me, I choose not to delve into much of that because for those of us who show up in good faith, when we fixate on things such as, is Barack Obama's wife, is Michelle Obama really a man? For many of us, we become susceptible to magical thinking. This is just my personal opinion. And so this is why I don't delve with some of those things, because when you start to talk about things that are far more practical, for example, things that can be of use to those of us who will be the citizens of, or we like to be the citizens of a better tomorrow, we must train our brains and our souls, and we must ingest and digest things that can be of practical use to us in the future. And so for many of us, I get how the memes and the TikToks and all those things are funny, they're humorous, and it's like I get it. But I don't do a lot of that tabloid-esque kind of a stuff, because when folks it's almost like a drug. You get high on the salacious, you get high on the scandalous, right? And then when it comes to the more painstaking work of really getting into some serious scholarship, that does not satisfy you, because it's like it's too weak a drug, because you've already become familiar and you've become almost inoculated with the hyper scandalous. And so the simple things are of no use to you. I don't know if that makes sense. You know, it makes sense to me. Maybe it doesn't make sense to you. But, you know, I hinted at this last time when I said, you know, if you were to snap your fingers and all of the world's evildoers were gone instantaneously, are those of us who are left, do we have what it takes? Do we have what it takes to create something livable? Because we are flawed just as, as anyone else. And so do we have what it takes? Fact of the matter is that you'll never be able to snap your fingers and instantaneously do away with all of the world's evildoers, right? That it takes something supernatural for that to happen, and that is beyond our capabilities. And so I just don't know. Some of you are just, in my opinion, you're just too caught up with the scandalous, and so I'm not doing that. Yeah, I agree with that, the philosophers. I agree with that. Okay, so I'm going to start off here. Here is an excerpt from Paul Robeson. Remember, I talked a lot about Paul Robeson because he is sort of like, he's always kind of omnipresent throughout all of this. And I don't know why. I just felt that this was necessary to read this. So here's an excerpt, and you can go and pull up the entire text online. It's not hard to find, but I just pulled some excerpts here from Paul Robeson's letter titled "To My Beloved Comrade." Some of you are probably familiar with this letter. Speculation is far easier than practical. It surely is, man. Let me get out the comment section because I don't want it to be too long, but the philosophist is absolutely correct. People spend too much time anyway, let me stop because you all are going to start thinking I'm attacking my audience, but I'm not. I'm really not. But it's just a friendly word of advice. We need to investigate at times what's directly in front of us, because sometimes we just become too, and as they say, facts are stranger than fiction, and so we start to think that we live in this real life, like this Hollywood production, when in fact, in spite of all of that, we still live in a real world of real consequence. And so the practical matters more so than the fantastic. So, to my beloved comrade, this was written in 1953 after the death of Joseph Stalin. So Paul Robeson is writing in 1953 to a now dead Joseph Stalin. These are just excerpts. Today in Korea, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America and the West Indies, in the Middle East, in Africa, one sees tens of millions of long oppressed colonial peoples surging toward freedom. What courage, what sacrifice, what determination, never to rest until victory. In all spheres of modern life, the influence of Stalin reaches wide and deep. From his last simply written but vastly discerning and comprehensive document, back through the years, his contributions to the science of our world society remain invaluable. Think about who he's talking about. He's talking about Joseph Stalin, this Paul Robeson. One reverently speaks of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin. He's saying he reverently speaks of them. He calls them the shapers of our humanity's richest present and future. Yes, through his deep humanity, by his wise understanding, he leaves us a rich and monumental heritage. Most importantly, he has charted the direction of our present and future struggles. He has pointed the way to peace, to friendly coexistence, to the exchange of mutual scientific and cultural contributions, to the end of war and destruction. How consequently, how patiently he labored for peace and ever-increasing abundance with what deep kindliness and wisdom he leaves tens of millions all over the world bowed in heart-aching grief. But he as well knows the struggle continues. So inspired by his noble example, let us lift our heads slowly but proudly high and march forward in the fight for peace, for a rich and rewarding life for all. So this is Paul Robeson. This is part of Paul Robeson's farewell to Joseph Stalin. Now, Frank Marshall Davis uttered similar flights of fancy nearly a decade earlier. I'm going to read from Frank Marshall Davis's Frankly Speaking column in the Honolulu Record. We're going to get to no, I'm sorry. Let me take that back. This wasn't part of his Frankly Speaking weekly column because this was published in 1946. This was before he moved to Honolulu. Here he wrote, this is probably in the Chicago Star. He wrote August 24th, 1946. The article was titled, "Our International Klansmen." I'm reading these things so you all can get the idea of what was going on in the mind, the hive mind of the left in the 1940s. And I want you to kind of think about that while you think about the rhetoric of the left today. Here is Frank Marshall Davis. The Ku Klux Klan is international. Maybe you hadn't thought of it this way, but there is a strong similarity between the Negro people of America and the rising people of the rest of the world. Remember, go back to what I spoke about in part one when I talked when I outlined Ahmed Ben Bella's comments when he came to the United States in 1962 and said, well, the United States and its struggle for racial equality must be linked directly to the anti-colonial struggles of third world peoples abroad. And this sort of like became the popular attitude and refrain of the new left from the 1960s into the 1970s. This is why I'm going to shamelessly plug again why I named one of my other YouTube uploads America's Viet Cong and the Politics of Murder, because in the mind of the new left, the Black Panther Party represented America's Viet Cong. And I forgot, I'm trying to remember, I think it was it may have been Robert Scheer or Tom Hayden that actually literally, he said so. He made such a suggestion that the Black Panther Party is the tip of the spear as far as the new left concerned, because they represented the best of what the new left was at the time, because the revolution was nigh. And so this was all, and then that's when you began to see, even in a MLK, you began to see MLK have this newfound internationalist perspective and approach toward the domestic struggle for social justice. It was all tied together, because the struggle of liberation was never domestic. The struggle for so-called liberation was always international, because the working class of the world was meant to unite, you see. And of course, this is the advanced class, so we all know where this workers of the world unite sort of attitude comes from. And so I won't even spend time on it. And so here you have Frank Marshall Davis saying the Ku Klux Klan is international, because the struggles of the Negro peoples of America are linked to the struggles of the rising people of the rest of the world. He goes on in this 1946 column. The forces supporting racism and attacks on Negroes are the same seeking to listen to what he says. The forces supporting racism and attacks on Negroes are the same forces seeking to wreck the new Poland, Yugoslavia, and China, and who want to get tough with Russia. So this is 1946. This was shortly after World War II. Now, we all know what the Soviet Union did after World War II. And then this, of course, began the Cold War, and you had the Truman Doctrine, and then you also had the Marshall Plan. Now, Truman is the Truman Doctrine. The Truman was sending aid to Greece, of course, and we all familiar with what happened with the Greek Civil War at the time, and Harry Truman was also sending aid and support to Turkey at the time. And so you had the Soviet Union eyeing Greece and Turkey at the time. This became known as the Truman Doctrine. And then, the Marshall Plan later was, of course, meant to, rebuild Western Europe and all these other things. And so here you have Frank Marshall Davis calling the this again, this is all ad hominem rhetoric, slander. I mean, again, this makes no sense on its face. Because the racist in America, this is how incoherent the left was in the 1940s. This is the same sort of incoherence and political ignorance we see being, bandied about by the left in America today. And this is the left all over the world. No matter where the left is, they all speak with one, they all utilize the same brain, the same mind, and they all speak with one voice. Frank Marshall Davis is saying that, and he's trying to draw sympathy, right, for the reader, because when you think of the Klan, he wants you to think of Americans' foreign policy toward Europe in that part of the Mediterranean, in that part of the Caucasus, which is sort of like that southwestern kind of tip of the Soviet Union as you're going into Turkey, and then from Turkey what would become modern day Georgia. But I don't think Georgia existed as a country at the time. I could be wrong. And so because the United States was trying to prevent the Soviet takeover of Poland, and we saw with Yugoslavia and Albania, and Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, all of this became part of the Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe behind, as Winston Churchill in his famous 1948 speech remarked that an iron curtain had fallen over Eastern Europe. So here is Frank Marshall Davis saying that the United States, in its efforts to prevent the Soviet Empire from taking over more territories, this was an example of international, almost like international racism, international Klansmanship. So so to speak. So again, this is the propaganda of the left. If you're trying to prevent Soviet expansion, then that makes you a racist. That makes you a Ku Klux Klan sympathizer. If you're trying to stop, I don't know if you all know anyone who is of Polish descent, anyone in America who is of Romanian descent, or who comes from Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia. Just ask them. Ask them. I get their opinion about the matter and see what they tell you. Now, Frank Marshall Davis, it was never quite made clear on his behalf exactly why he chose to move to Hawaii. Now, according to Frank Marshall Davis, I think he claims that he and his wife made a trip there at one point and they kind of liked it. And so they was like, let's relocate to Hawaii. I think we're going to do that. Maybe it was the weather, whatever, I'm not sure. I don't know if those of you who aren't familiar with the cost of living in Hawaii, it is quite extraordinary. But, again, I sort of get it. But, again, I'm not quite sure. But we'll get into the forming of Hawaii. I think Hawaii gained statehood in 1959. So we're going to talk about that because Hawaii is key to much of this. Remember, legend has it, and I covered this in part 1 as well, that it was Paul Robeson who actually convinced Frank Marshall Davis to move to Hawaii in the first place. And remember that Jomo Kenyatta, who was trained in Moscow, was a one-time roommate of Paul Robeson, while Jomo Kenyatta and Paul Robeson were both residing in London, England. And of course, Kenya, we are told, is the native country of Barack Obama Sr., who may or not be Barack Obama's biological father. So you have to understand that. So when it comes to the left, the communist Marxist left, there's this secret clandestine sort of network of, and we actually see a lot of the letters and correspondence that they had with one another. They had secret code names that they would refer to one another. It was just one big, again, the communist conspiracy is an international conspiracy. It is an international criminal conspiracy. And so it may be coincidence, it may not be coincidence that many of these individuals are connected, quite frankly. And so, there are orders, letters, and correspondence between and amongst these individuals. And again, you know, Frank Marshall Davis was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party. And so, you know, again, but he makes it seem as though he just went to Hawaii on a whim. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. When Frank Marshall Davis was sent to Hawaii, he was given a job as a member of the writing staff of the Honolulu Record, right? And he wrote for the Honolulu Record from, I think it was, 1949 to sometime during the maybe early 1950s. Not quite sure how long he was on staff. But he was brought on to the staff of the Honolulu Record by a man named, remember this name, and I got some information in here about him. He is a man of international intrigue. When you hear his name, this is a man who, when you talk about the Cold War, when you talk about communism, this is a man who doesn't get mentioned often, but he needs to be talked about more if we're going to, you know, shine new light on what happened historically and, you know, why we are in the pickle that we are in today. Frank Marshall Davis was brought on to the staff of the Honolulu Record by a man named Koji Ariyoshi. Some of you may have heard the name. If you're familiar with this type of content, if you've done your research, you are bound to come across the name Koji Ariyoshi. There are three men in particular who are deeply connected to Frank Marshall Davis, and I'm going to cover all three of them, but I'm going to deal with Koji Ariyoshi first. Now, who is Koji Ariyoshi? Koji Ariyoshi was born in 1914 on a coffee plantation in Kona, on an island called, I'm try to do my best with these Hawaiian names here, on an island called Kilakukua. The best I can say it. Kilakukua. Ariyoshi, now if you can't tell by his name, Ariyoshi was of Japanese heritage. You had a lot of Japanese folk who, you know, who were of Japanese descent or who were of Japanese heritage residing on the islands of what would become Hawaii. Okay. If you go back to, of course, you know, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, what was that, 1941? You know, we're all familiar with the controversial Supreme Court decision of, you know, Karamatsu. What was it? Karamatsu v. the United States, which deemed it legal to, you know, round up anyone in the United States of Japanese descent into concentration. Pardon the language, because they were not concentration camps. They were not comparable to concentration camps in any way. Pardon me there. You'll hear some leftists who would make such a suggestion, but that's not true at all. As point of fact, the internment camps, that's the word I was looking for, were you know, again, I'm not trying to make a case that interning the Japanese was moral. I'm not making that suggestion at all. But point of fact, there were some Japanese Americans that welcomed the internment because they saw it as a means of protection from domestic hostilities from non-Japanese. So yeah, and also as point of fact, there were Japanese spy networks in the United States. As a matter of fact, I hate when I do this because I got to go dig it up because I want to tell you guys, and I probably will tell you guys next time. There is I think he was an American national, but he is another American national who is of Japanese heritage, who has done a lot of historical research and data on the goings-on back then. And he details that many Japanese folk in the United States had split loyalties, as point of fact, that there were some American-born folk of Japanese descent who were rooting for the Japanese Imperial Army in World War II. And there were, in fact, we did have significant reason to suspect that there were, again, you know, highly sophisticated Japanese spy networks in the United States, especially on the islands of what would become Hawaii. And if you, for further information on this, you all can read a document known as the Roberts Commission Report. The Roberts Commission Report. Anyway, because there was after Pearl Harbor, there was a Japanese fighter plane that crash landed on the islands of Hawaii, and it turned into a whole big deal. But anyway, the Roberts Commission Report, for those of you who are unfamiliar with that. So anyway, going off on a tangent there because I like to do that. Ariyoshi, our Marxist school system, they never describe the nuance, right? If the philosophist is hitting me with some good comments, man. Again, there's always a gray area. There's good and bad. There's, there are no answers. There are no solutions. Or only trade-offs. And so we have to sort of deal with things as they come. And there's a brilliant phenomenon when it comes to the liberal tradition that we quite often take for granted. I know the left does, because they aren't seeking something that is, I guess, they aren't seeking a thing preferable to another thing. The only thing that is preferable in the mind of a leftist is perfection. But one thing that is brilliant and inherent within the liberal tradition is its ability to self-correct. And that is, in fact, what is doing so much damage to the United States specifically, is the United States' ability to acknowledge when it has done something wrong. And it is because of the United States' ability to self-correct that opportunists take it upon themselves to try and knock and remove the United States from its moral perch. Because it is to the extent that the United States and the West, by and large, is short of perfection, it is to that extent that the West should not remain, on the moral high ground, so to speak. Because it is these opportunists, these statists, these Marxian globalist types who are seeking to replace what we have with something preferable, right? And something that is of their own conception. Because seeing as how these people are, in fact, godless, they are trying to appease this inherent psychic need for some sort of human redemption. So they exploit the fact that we acknowledge that perhaps the internment of the Japanese was unethical, without realizing, like the philosophers hinted at, and like I've been explaining, that history is filled with nuance. And sometimes the answers aren't necessarily clear to us at the time, but we deal with the information we have at the time so that we can, make a prudent decision. And I'm no huge fan of FDR. You all know this, right? I'm not. But again, it's nuance. Tom Sowell, who happens to be one of my intellectual idols and inspirations, like many of you, Thomas Sowell says in his own words, and he said that in his humble opinion, that FDR, it is quite ironic when you consider Thomas Sowell's his ideological, I guess, leanings, so to speak, that FDR, in Thomas Sowell's opinion, was one of our nation's greatest presidents. And so, again, I'm not trying to attack FDR simply for the sake of attacking him, because there is enough to attack FDR about, but perhaps the internment of the Japanese is not at the top of the heap, because there were Japanese spies in the United States. Anyway, I'm getting kind of long on that, but I think you all get the point. Ariyoshi attended high school at Konohana High School before he would move to Honolulu and enroll. Where would he enroll? The University of Hawaii. Prior to his enrollment at U of H, Ariyoshi was already writing for the Honolulu Star Bulletin, detailing what he observed to be the appalling working conditions of Honolulu's plantation and dock workers. Ariyoshi, of course, being a dock worker himself. So you're seeing the radical gears beginning to turn in the mind of a young Ariyoshi. In 1940, Ariyoshi won a YMCA fellowship to study at the University of Georgia. Now, the YMCA, ladies and gentlemen, has always been heavily involved in these various nefarious communist activities. For those of you who don't know, the YMCA has always been and I'm not saying that, I don't know if those who ran and controlled the YMCA, if they were, I'm not trying to indict them rhetorically, but let's just say that the communists have also used the YMCA as cover for some of their activities. I'll just leave that there. And of course, with Ariyoshi going to the University of Georgia, we saw too, remember that Frank Marshall Davis had a brief stint in Atlanta, Georgia, where he worked for a black entrepreneur who owned his own newspaper, a man by the name of W.A. Scott. So it's funny how these folks are kind of like, when they're not in the same place at the same time, it's almost like they're walking in each other's footsteps. While in Georgia, Ariyoshi would stay with the parents. I thought this was an interesting tidbit regarding Ariyoshi. He would stay with the parents of the writer of the famous novel Tobacco Road. And of course, if you all are, I'm not a fiction guy. I'm not really into fiction novels, but Erskine Caldwell, of course, is the famous author who wrote Tobacco Road. Tobacco Road is probably his most famous work. And if you all know about Erskine Caldwell himself was a leftist and a communist sympathizer along with his parents. And Erskine Caldwell, of course, also was a lifelong labor activist and spokesman for racial and economic justice. So it's quite coincidental, wink, wink, that Ariyoshi would stay with the parents of Erskine Caldwell. Again, at the time, you had a lot of novelists and poets and writers, even men like Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway was also a communist sympathizer. And of course, Erskine Caldwell, there's a ton of information out there on him and his radical socialist views, and he would, of course, incorporate his political views in his literary work. Ariyoshi, while attending the University of Georgia, was also exposed to the harsh realities of racial discrimination in the Jim Crow South. Now, I'm not sure what year. No. I think I don't know what you mean, Synergy, when you say no YouTube today. I don't know if you mean to cut into the culture. As far as I know, we are still on tap for tonight on Chad O. Jackson's YouTube channel. As far as I know. I'm not sure what year Ariyoshi officially joined the Communist Party. But by the summer of 1941, he had resettled in San Francisco, where he worked as a dockhand organizing for well-known communist Carl Yaneda, and was active in the, now remember this, guys, remember this organization here. Ariyoshi was active in the International Longshore and Warehouse Union under the direction of Harry Bridges. And I'm going to talk about Harry Bridges, but remember the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the ILWU. I'm going to be referring to it as the ILWU primarily from here on out, but that is the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union under the direction of Harry Bridges. Now, from the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, because, and part of what really helped to radicalize Russia, if you think about it, people have oftentimes tried to criticize me because I play too fast and loose with trying to apply Marxism to everything, right? Because Marxism is an economic theory. This is what these folks who I quite frankly consider to be intellectual lightweights or historical novices But of course, Karl Marx, prophesized that, these various socio-economic systems would come in succession, because there was this natural dialectical process that was unfolding before our very eyes. But of course, Karl Marx would abandon this sort of organic manifestation, these organic manifestations, right, in favor of a more revolutionary approach, I suppose, meaning that those who had the necessary insight should take it upon themselves to bypass certain phases, because that would mean the arrival of this, I guess, perfection at an earlier time. So this was for the purpose of alleviating mankind from so much unnecessary suffering, because the industrial age was certain to bring said suffering about, at least in the eyes of Karl Marx. So what am I saying in my long-winded way? That Russia was not the tipping point of capitalistic development, but it was the first sort of known country on the record to sort of make Marx's theories the political, driving a force, behind the entire sort of political mechanisms. What am I trying to say? The Soviet Union was the first to make Karl Marx's philosophies the governing principles of the state, is what I'm trying to say. And you had these various socialist, even you had all sorts of socialist movements in the United States. As a matter of fact, we talk about the utopian, they called them utopians at the time. You think about men like Robert Owen, even a lot of the early groups of Quakers in the United States had these sort of socialist-esque societies. But of course, it wasn't until the 1917 Russian Revolution and we saw Marx's theories really become the governing principle of the state. And so Marx was wrong in that it wasn't economic at all. Economics had nothing to do with it. But part of what helped to really sort of push Russia in this direction was because Russia was really sort of exhausting itself, because Russia was involved in all sorts of military conflicts from the early 1900s up to the up to World War I. And so Russia was undergoing a ton of turmoil, cultural and political strife, and the morale of the country was so low, given the fact that Russia was just involved in these ongoing wars. When we saw early stages and phases of early communism in Russia as far back as the 1860s, thanks to a man who was a one-time sort of partner or confidant of Karl Marx himself, until Karl Marx ran him out of the Internationale by claiming that he was attempting to sabotage the movement. And that, of course, was a Russian Marxist by the name of Michael Bakunin. And it was Michael Bakunin who is said by historians to be the man who introduced the Russians to, by and large, to Marxian theories. This was as far back as the 1860s. But what really allowed for Marxists and the Bolsheviks or whatever to take over Russia was the existence of this sort of low cultural and political morale, thanks to Russia's ongoing military conflicts. And of course, their war with China in the early 1900s was key to this. So from the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to the rise of Japanese imperialism during World War II, the fact of such Japanese aggression and provocation led Ariyoshi to begin calling for a second front to aid the Soviet Union. Ariyoshi would join the U.S. Army in 1944 and was assigned to participate in the famous Dixie Mission. Are you all familiar with what the Dixie Mission is? This is something else that when you get some spare time or whatever, look into the Dixie Mission. This was, just kind of cut to chase, the United States was trying to gain or provide aid and comfort to Mao Zedong, because it was the peasant-led counteroffensive, or the counteroffensive of the peasants of China, led by Mao Zedong, that was sort of helping, I guess, on the ground to wage a counteroffensive against the Japanese occupying army. And so this was part of the whole Dixie mission, and Koji Ariyoshi was part of the Dixie mission. The Dixie mission, I just outlined it, I put it here in writing. The Dixie mission's purpose was to connect with Chinese communist guerrillas who were waging a counteroffensive against China's Japanese occupiers. And it was through this experience that Ariyoshi began publicly advocating for the removal of China's nationalist government under Chiang Kai-shek in favor of the leader of the Chinese peasants, a man to whom he had come to know personally during his deployment, which was, of course, Mao Zedong. Now, I'm going to skip ahead, y'all, to 1948, because, again, the life of Koji Ariyoshi is a very, very detailed life. He was a man of international intrigue, and I quite frankly don't have the time to go into a ton of detail regarding Ariyoshi. I just wanted to kind of lay a solid foundation here. But by 1948, Ariyoshi had returned to Hawaii and with the backing of the ILWU, had founded the radical left-wing publication, the Honolulu Record. And soon thereafter, he would go on to hire fellow traveler Frank Marshall Davis. Now, one more aside, when it came to Ariyoshi was charged and convicted as a member of the infamous Honolulu 7. How many of you all are familiar with the case of the Honolulu 7? The Honolulu 7 was convicted under the Smith Act in 1951 for conspiring to overthrow the United States government. Of course, you know, the Supreme Court years later would overturn the Smith Act. The Smith Act was deemed unconstitutional, and many of folk who were convicted under the Smith Act, you know, had their convictions overturned. And a lot of times, as a matter of fact, there was a purge of sorts of teachers, particularly in New York, because there were a ton of teachers in New York who were part of the teachers union, who were in fact convicted under the Smith Act, and a lot of teachers were let go, and they had they were denied their pensions and so on and so forth. And so once the Smith Act was deemed unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court, I believe that's how it all went down. Many of these teachers either had their positions reinstated, or many of them decided not to even go back into teaching, but they did, in fact, have their pensions restored. And so, again, the United States has a weird way of correcting itself and admitting when it has done wrong. And so, so a lot of these, a lot of folks who were convicted under the Smith Act were in fact given all sorts of type of penance and financial and monetary compensation for this crusade against their civil rights and their First Amendment rights and everything else. But we know that the CPs, that CPUSA, the Communist Party of the United States, as an organ of the Soviet Comintern, was in fact trying to overthrow the United States government. We know this for a fact. But I guess they opted for infiltration instead of overthrow. Anyway, the Democrat Party's rise to power had a great deal to do with the political influence of the ILWU. Understand that it was virtually the Communist Party that created the Hawaii that we know today. Hawaii gained its statehood thanks to the efforts of the Communist Party and those working on an individual level and those working on behalf of the Communist Party. There are 2 books I'm going to lay on you guys if you're interested in the how Hawaii was founded. There's 2 books. One titled Fighting in Paradise, Labor Unions, Racism, and Communists in the Making of Modern Hawaii. Let me repeat that. If you guys are readers, go check out a book, Fighting in Paradise, Labor Unions, Racism, and Communists in the Making of Modern Hawaii. Another interesting book that you all can go and read is The Specter of Communism in Hawaii. The title, The Specter of Communism in Hawaii. And just for more on Koji Oriyoshi in particular, Koji Oriyoshi, you can go read his memoir titled From Kona to Yan'an, The Political Memoirs of Koji Oriyoshi. From Kona to Yan'an, The Political Memoirs of Koji Oriyoshi. Yan'an is like I think it's like a province. I don't know if they call them provinces or whatever in China, because that's where he was located for a while and, helped to further radicalize Koji Oriyoshi. But Koji Oriyoshi, again, was a communist through and through. And he was a big deal on the islands of Hawaii. According to now, remember I talked about remember the name Harry Bridges. I talked about Harry Bridges. Harry Bridges was the head of the ILWU. Harry Bridges to this day is still an icon to the labor union activists of today, or those who are in favor of unions. Now, me being I am from the school of Milton Friedman and Mises and Hayek and Sol, and so I have a disdain for unions. Quite frankly, I do. I don't believe that they provide our country with a net good. I don't. And we know from an historical point of view that unions have long been used to sort of seep, right, socialism, communism, to make it a part of the not just the American body politic, but just the collective American state of mind. This sort of anti-business attitude. I'm not saying that unions are always bad. I'm not, I know some of you are probably members of unions, but just bear in mind that more oftentimes than not, unions are used to, and there were times where, unions, some of these unions, whenever they would discover that or had a feeling that there was some communist infiltration of their unions, they would fight tooth and nail to try to rid themselves of it. And a lot of times earlier back in the day, particularly when it came to a lot of Irish and Italian Americans, they despised the communists. As a matter of fact, and it was due in large part, of course, because of the communists and their dedication to their atheist beliefs. And, the Italians and Irish, are very, very, or at least at the time, perhaps they were. Perhaps they still are now. I don't know many Italians and Irish Americans, me personally, but the Catholic Church is a huge part of cultural life for many Italians and Irish, and part of the ways that the communists sought to gain the support of blue collar Italians and Irish was they employed a tactic that became known as the tactic of the outstretched hand. This was a tactic that was the brainchild of a communist sympathizer, one of the co-founders of the ACLU, a man by the name of Earl Browder. Earl Browder, who too was a member of the Communist Party of America. He was also one of the founding members of the ACLU, and it was his tactic of the outstretched hand that sought to trying to draw a connection, or to have this sort of kinship with blue collar Italian workers through their unions. Anyway, another tangent, but again, I like to do that. So unions, I'm not saying unions are always bad, but as a whole, I don't really feel there is much use for them. Anyway, hey man, the philosopher said if you get rid of regulatory capture unions, let me make sure I'm reading this correctly. If you get rid of regulatory capture, unions would be largely unnecessary. I agree. According to the Harry Bridges Center for Labor Studies at the University of Washington, Harry Bridges was one of the most, this is a quote on their website, Harry Bridges was one of the most influential labor leaders in United States history. Again, Harry Bridges, he's like an icon to the labor unions. In 1934, in the wake of the Great Maritime Strike, guys can go and look up the Great Maritime Strike, the socialist militant, my description, Harry Bridges, would become the leader of the International Longshoremen and Warehousemen's Union from 1934 to his retirement in 1977. Remember, I spoke about Frank Marshall Davis and his weekly column. His weekly column in the Honolulu Record was titled "Frankly Speaking." The Honolulu Record was published for and by the ILWU. So the Honolulu Record was the official paper of the ILWU. Here is an excerpt from his September 22nd, 1949, Frankly Speaking column titled, what was it titled? I kind of lost my place. Titled Cold War in Church. This was the title. Just to give you the frame of mind of what was going on in Hawaii. This is Frank Marshall Davis writing for the Honolulu Record, which was the sort of like unofficial newspaper of the ILWU. Here's an excerpt from this 1949 column. The Cold War policies of the bipartisans administered by their thought control police are aimed against such Negroes as Paul Robeson. Think about To My Beloved Comrade, just to know and get into the mindset of Paul Robeson, who think American democracy could learn about race relations from Russia. Again, this is the pablum that they were pushing. This is what men like Paul Robeson, Frank Marshall Davis, even shining cultural luminaries of the Harlem Renaissance like Langston Hughes, and men who actually attended, men like Claude McKay, who was perhaps the second most influential poet of the Harlem Renaissance, Claude McKay, who was actually present at, I believe it was the 4th Congress of the Communist International. Claude McKay, he was actually present as one of the delegates, so to speak, the American delegates that spoke before the Communist International. This was the pablum that they were pushing, that Russia had pretty much eradicated racism. There was no racism in the Soviet Union. So while the black race grifters and black race hustlers of that day were trying to convince black people that Soviet communism was the way, and if you were opposed to Soviet communism, then you were opposed to bettering race relations for the Negro in America. So let me just back up and rewind, and I'm going to start that sentence off from the top. He goes, the Cold War policies of the bipartisans administered by their thought control police are aimed against such Negroes as Paul Robeson, who thinks American democracy could learn about race relations from Russia. Such leaders as Harry Bridges, who oppose Taft-Hartley and the imperialistic Marshall Plan. Again, Taft-Hartley was a law that was passed that I don't know the particulars of Taft-Hartley. You guys can look up the Taft-Hartley Act. The Taft-Hartley Act, simply put, was aimed at trying to undermine or try to suck up, to remove some of the organizing, the powers of the labor union. Again, you all know, the labor unions from political subterfuge vis-a-vis the Communist Party, Of course, you know, we all are familiar with the labor unions and their connection with organized crime. Again, labor unions are used as a funnel or a cover for all sorts of illegal and nefarious activities. We know this. And so Taft-Hartley was trying to figure out a way to try and hamper or cut off at the knees the organizing efforts of a lot of these labor unions. And the imperialistic Marshall Plan. Remember, he's saying that the Marshall Plan is imperialistic, but not the Soviet plan for expansion. Because, see, these countries that were vying for this sort of new way to go about doing things, according to Frank Marshall Davis, these countries should be left to their own devices. And so while the United States, see, what they were trying to do is they were trying to sabotage the foreign policy efforts of the United States so that these countries could be left to their own devices. But what was really going on was that the Soviet Union was going into these places like Greece, like Turkey, in order to mount a successful overthrow and to mount a successful Soviet takeover of these countries that had been weakened and that were war-ravished by the effects of World War II. But notice how the United States, we're the imperialists. It's never our opponents. It's never our enemies. You see. And against such pastors as Dr. Mellish, those of you who are unfamiliar with, I think the father's name was William, and Frank Marshall Davis is talking about the son. He's talking about John Howard Mellish. His father, William Howard Mellish, these were the Mellishes. They were a bunch of Soviet sympathizing pastors. And so, yes, you all should get to know William and John Mellish just to get an understanding of the infiltration of communism in the Protestant church. But anyway, moving on. Who believe the Soviet Union and the United States can live peacefully in the same world. Again, they use the church to try and weaken the United States militarily because they knew that that would aid their emperor, Joseph Stalin. The church's attitude from the Dr. John Howard Mellishes of the world, fast forward to the MLKs of the world, that as good Christians are always for peace, you see. And so, blessed were the peacemakers was the common refrain of the social justice Protestant. And so, if the United States was trying to meet the Soviet Union head on, then of course we were the ones that were in the wrong because we were provoking this war. Now, here's another one of Davis's weekly column in the Record. This was one he published a couple of weeks earlier on September 1st of the same year, 1949. This was titled "Democracy is Indivisible." He says in this column titled "Democracy is Indivisible," he says, "An amazingly large number of Negroes have observed the forces who shout loudest about the communist menace are the same forces who won't extend equal rights to minority groups." You see what he's doing? They realize also that if the civil rights of communists can be taken away in complete defiance of the federal Constitution, then it will be much easier to grab back those democratic rights that minority groups have won through long and painful struggle. Do you see the propaganda? He's telling folks that if you are aligned with anti-communists and the Joe McCarthy's of the world and the J. Edgar Hoovers of the world, even though, and I've said this last time, that there was perhaps no president in American history that the communists despised more than Harry Truman. Even you talk about Ronald Reagan, hell, even a man in Woodrow Wilson, who I am no huge fan of, to his credit, was vehemently opposed to Bolshevism. All you gotta do is just go and look at Woodrow Wilson's speeches and writings and look up his attitudes toward Bolshevism. Anyway, but you see the propaganda. What Frank Marshall Davis is saying is that if you support our government's efforts in flushing out and exposing the communist menace to the wider American public, then you are at the same time opposed to the civil rights gains of African Americans, because they're under the pretense of stomping out communism domestically. They're going to use that to also attack the civil rights gains of the Negro. You see this game that he's playing. The left is doing the same thing today. You gotta, it's not even subtle. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. It has also been asked how the United States, now look at while he's talking about the federal constitution, the same time the Bolshevik left, the American Bolsheviks, they despise our constitution, but yet they hide behind it. And they get the so-called liberal or the so-called progressive to run cover for communists under the guise or with the pretense that the civil rights of the communists are being violated when we do not allow them to operate within the United States. But it's not about the free speech of the communists. It's about their subversion and their clandestine activities to overthrow the very Constitution that they hide behind. And this was always the case. And they knew, and this is the thing that even Democrat politicians who were anti-communist, this is what they said publicly, while at the same time the propaganda of the American left was that the United States that the rights of the American communists were under attack. That's not the case, because our politicians at the time knew that, of course, communists in the United States were loyal to a foreign adversary. You see, like my partner in crime today, the philosophist was trying to express upon the comment section, not that the comment section already knew, but he shared his thoughts, and I agree with him, is that the nuance of the situation, you see, because communists in the United States were trying to, again, if you pledge allegiance to Moscow, if you pledge allegiance to the United States, what are we to make of you if, in fact, a hot war was to break out with our foreign adversaries? You are an enemy within the border of the United States itself. So what are we to do with you with respect to whatever military disadvantage would come about, considering the fact that quite literally our enemy has breached our borders? So it is important that we get to the bottom of what is going on with respect to American communism, considering the fact that according to our own intelligence, we knew that American communists were not loyal first to America, which is what you do when you pledge allegiance. Again, they have the whole ceremony when foreign-born folks are nationalized and become American citizens. Your allegiance is to your country first, not to Soviet Russia. But communists in America were loyal first to Soviet Russia. That's why it was important. But again, we just, we was, red baiting and McCarthy and this and that, you see. But let me tell you something. There was no ideological faction in the United States that was more McCarthy-esque, that is more McCarthy-esque than the left. There is no more sense of paranoia and intolerance of dissension than the American left. And if you need any evidence of that, just look at the American campus. If you want to see McCarthyism at work today, look at the American campus. Like it isn't the job of our elected representatives to protect our rights against an insurgency. It has also been asked how the United States expects to rule Russia when the federal government can't rule Mississippi. Newsflash, Frank Marshall Davis. I know you're probably looking up from hell right now if you didn't repent. But the federal government isn't supposed to control Mississippi. I know you don't understand that, right? Because as a Stalinist, you are totalitarian. So you don't believe in states' rights. Mississippi gets to govern Mississippi. I guess since you go on and on and on about the Constitution, I suppose you've never read the 10th Amendment. Or hell, the 9th Amendment. I don't know. But for crying out loud, the federal government doesn't rule Mississippi. But again, since folks are getting lynched in Mississippi, how dare the federal government tell Russia how it ought to conduct itself when we still have black folks getting lynched in Mississippi? Okay. Some cynics have suggested that the reason for the scarcity of democracy throughout the mainland comes from the amount we have exported to Greece and Turkey. So again, Frank Marshall Davis is saying that the reason why we cannot root out racism in America is because America is too fixated, meaning the federal government is too fixated on sending aid to Greece and Turkey. The same source of complaints was being circulated by the left during the 1960s by the likes of MLK and the entire anti-war contingent in America, because we had no business sending foreign aid to Southeast Asia when we still had so many problems domestically, because in their minds, resources in wealth and property reallocation is going to fix the problems of America's underclass. No, it's the spread of domestic socialism that has given rise to the American underclass. What we have in America's cities, in America's major cities that are primarily occupied by black folks, what you have are these little itty bitty communist enclaves in America. These petty socialist dictatorships in our major American cities. Thank God for our framers who came up with our constitutional framework, the small R Republican framework, which allows for individuals who want to escape these socialist policies. It gives them a way out. Or else we'd be under the auspice of a unitary government, a nationalistic government that is top down. Our system wasn't set up that way. But I know that's too complicated for a dullard like Frank Marshall Davis to understand. Even the American left of today, they don't understand it. Side note, also, I don't know if you all, the famous baseball player Jackie Robinson would echo similar sentiment before Congress when he was subpoenaed by the HUAC committee. Listen, I'm not saying, listen, because I don't know a ton about Jackie Robinson. In my intellectual travels, Jackie Robinson has come up, but I can't, but I have seen in some instances when Jackie Robinson was, quite frankly, being used to promote and say a lot of stupid things. Just like a lot of black celebrities today. But Jackie Robinson went into similar sentiment when Jackie Robinson, he was what they called them then. They called them the anti-communist. Jackie Robinson was an anti-communist in that he criticized the United States government's efforts to root out communism. Because Jackie Robinson was so hell-bent on clearing up this whole race problem that he couldn't fathom how the United States could even the United States didn't have the moral authority to be critical of communism when there was so much racism abound. Also, it was Jackie Robinson who was key in the 1960s when it came to putting the death nail, the final death nail, through the heart of whatever sort of loyalty that African Americans had left for the Republican Party, because he was so anti-Goldwater. Anyway, whole nother conversation, because at that point, you know, the narrative began to switch, where, of course, the Republican Party became the party of the racists, because as the bearer, so to speak, of the mantle of the Republican Party, Barry Goldwater, winning the nomination in 1964, Barry Goldwater was one of the few Republicans at the time who were dead set against the 1964 Civil Rights Act, not because he was a racist, but because he was of the opinion that the 1964 Civil Rights Act was unconstitutional and that it would set the precedent for an onslaught of attack against the private property rights of all Americans. And he knew it was bad news. And he was prophetic in this way, Barry Goldwater. And it was, of course, Jackie Robinson who said all black folks should abandon the Republican Party so long as they still harbor racists like Barry Goldwater. Now, anyway, where I leave off. Okay. The fact that Harry Bridges, the fact of Harry Bridges is, I put fact in quotes because you know how they do. All right. It's like, we heard, but we don't know. So if some folk, you can prove it, like Frank Marshall Davis, we know he was a card carrying member of the Communist Party. That is indisputable. Harry Bridges is kind of like, because they still try and protect the legacy of Harry Bridges by saying that Harry Bridges was the victim of conservative attacks. Although, of course, historically speaking, at the time, Democrats led the charge, and I said this last time that it was a lot of Democrats leading the charge from the 1930s through up to and through the 1950s. But anyway, the fact of Harry Bridges' Communist Party membership was attested to by a man named Richard St. Clair, who was a former guard at a local Communist Party headquarters, who said that other communists told him, quote, "Yes, Bridges is one of us, but keep your mouth shut about it." This was reported in the San Francisco News on April 23rd, 1941. Also, confessed communists such as Richard Wilmot and Nat Honig testified in Bridges' deportation and perjury hearings that he, Bridges, was in fact a communist. Now, I know you like perjury and deportation. What do you mean deportation? Well, Harry Bridges was born in Melbourne, Australia. He was not an American citizen. Anyway, so that's just a short bit about Harry Bridges. But again, Harry Bridges was the leader of the ILWU. Also, another key member of the ILWU who was also connected with Frank Marshall Davis is a man by the name of Jack Hall. Now, who is Jack Hall? Jack Hall was born in 1915 and was director of organization for the ILWU and one of its two vice presidents before dying of a stroke in 1971. Now, the Communist Party of Hawaii was actually founded, I felt the need to put this in here, was actually founded by a CPUSA member by the name of Bill Bailey. He was a fellow New Yorker, or not fellow, he was from New York. I can't remember, where was Jack Bridges born? I'm trying to remember. I may have put Jack Bridges' place of birth here. I might be in my notes somewhere. But anyway, Bill Bailey was sent by the party to organize the dock and agricultural workers in Hawaii, sort of like Davis, right? Everybody's getting summoned to Hawaii. And the charter membership of the party, which was founded in 1937, was 12 members at 10 cents per member to join. Among the 12, these were the 12 charter members of the Communist Party of Hawaii, founded in 1937 by Bill Bailey. Among them were Jack Hall and Harry Bridges. Now, just to close out on the ILWU, The Union virtually merged with the Democrat Party to form the most powerful civil and political coalition on the islands of Hawaii. No Democrat politician was elected without the endorsement of the ILWU. I need you all to understand this. Believe it or not now, prior to the 1940s, Hawaii's legislature had been dominated by the Republican Party for 50 consecutive years. And so it was through the ILWU that the Communist Party was successful in seizing political control in Hawaii. Now, to what extent is Hawaii still like some sort of communist outpost? Well, we know that Hawaii is, of course, one of the deepest and darkest blue, as they say, states in the Union. But anyway, I'll move on from Hawaii. I don't know a ton about Hawaii's local politics. I just know that, you know, you keep sending us the likes of Mazie Hirono. And I don't know. I'm going to have to petition that Hawaii go back to being a colony but independent of the federal government. Anyway, so let's go to why you all came here. I know it's painstaking, y'all, but this is just what I do here. Some of this stuff might kind of bore you guys. Again, I'm not into the scandalous and the sensational. That's just not what I do. Now let's move on, because I know y'all came here for Obama. So right now we're going to get into the Dunhams and Barack Obama Sr. Just going to give you a little background on the Dunhams and Barack Obama Sr. Now, the Dunhams moved to Hawaii from Seattle in 1960 when Madeline Dunham was offered a job at the Bank of Hawaii, while Stanley Armour Dunham worked for a furniture store. Now, again, I know y'all all on this whole Michelle Obama is really a man thing. Well, funny how Ann Dunham, with Barack Obama's biological mother, so we are told, she was named after her father. It's kind of, you know, kind of strange. I guess it's not something that you see commonly see. But yes, Ann Dunham, you know, her full name was Stanley Ann Dunham, and her father's name was Stanley Armour Dunham. But I'm going to refer to the grandfather of Barack Obama Jr., Stanley Dunham. When I mention his name, I'm going to refer to him as Stanley, and I'm going to refer to his mother as Ann, not Stanley, because if there are two Stanleys, you all might get a little confused. So Stanley is the grandfather, Ann is the mother. But anyway, Barack Obama Sr. was a goat herder in rural Kenya before winning a scholarship to study in the United States. Stanley Ann Dunham, daughter of Madeline and Stanley Armour Dunham, would meet Barack Obama Sr. at the University of Hawaii in a Russian language class. Now, wait a minute. Now, let me just ask y'all a question. Does that strike anyone as odd, or maybe it's just coincidental? But why this interest in learning Russian? Now, a good friend of mine, I'm joking because I don't know him, but Dennis Prager, if you all follow Dennis Prager always talks about how, you know, he studied Russian language as well. I guess his field of expertise was communism, this being Dennis Prager. And while studying communism, I think Dennis Prager said he learned how to speak Russian. You all can quote me. I've never heard him speak Russian, by the way. You all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Dennis Prager does speak Russian. I think he said he studied the Russian language. So again, and Dennis Prager is one of a handful of conservative Jews out there, because, you know, the Jewish people are notoriously left wing. For reasons that I couldn't quite wrap my mind around for a long time, but I'm starting to understand it more and more as I do more research into 19th century Europe. And well, anyway, I don't want to get into a side bit about that. But anyway, like I told you all last time, and I'm going to quote the Archbishop Fulton Sheen when he says that how does he say it? What does he say? He says that ideology is separate from individuals, in so many words. And so, like I told you all last time, I do not believe that whatever this is, I don't believe that this is some sort of Jewish conspiracy. I don't believe that. I just don't. there's an ideological war happening, and certain folks and certain groups of people sort of take on this, because culture has a way of doing that. Culture is what links it is what allows for you to feel some sort of that sense of closeness and social affirmation and reinforcement that we as all human beings need. And so groups have a tendency to kind of move somewhat as a collective, for better or for worse. And we saw in the 19th century, with the popularity of a Sigmund Freud and a Karl Marx, this sort of rise of what I call a Jewish intelligentsia, same way that blacks. And so again, the majority of Jews are left wing, and the majority of blacks in the United States are left wing. And that's just what it is for reasons. Anyway, I may do a whole talk on that as well. But again, I know this may upset some people. You call me this and that. I'm scared to call out the obvious. No, I'm not scared to call out the obvious, because I'm talking about it right now. But I have the most deepest and some of the most profound respect for men like Dennis Prager, Mark Levin, David Horowitz, Andrew Clavin. I can go on down the line. And so, ideology has no respect of ethnicity or race. This is about ideas. This is not about people. Anyway, rumor has it that the FBI had Stanley Dunham, the father, Stanley Armour Dunham, under watch, but his FBI file at some point was destroyed. Now, again, that's just a rumor, but rumor has it that the FBI had Barack Obama's grandfather under surveillance. This is strange. I mean, God, bear in mind that this man became president of the United States, this Barack Obama character. You gotta realize this, man. I mean, this is crazy to me. It just goes to show you what exactly happened to our FBI. For all of you out there who, I know even some conservatives still to this day, and you've probably heard me on various platforms defend J. Edgar Hoover. And I know we look at what our FBI is doing today and the legalese or the lawfare that is being used to try and destroy, because, we see that, again, that the statist, the secular humanist left, and the massive bureaucracy that was created that has become this sort of runaway train has literally become an appendage of the left. Is what we call the administrative state or the deep state, and the FBI, the CIA, our entire intelligence apparatus has become an extension of the left. We see that. Again, y'all, but I don't, how can I say? Again, just like any other thing, there's this kind of internal back and forth going on. But see, I have to acknowledge these things because, folks may think that I am completely oblivious to what's going on. And Chuck, you trying to defend the FBI. I'm not trying to defend the FBI. I'm defending J. Edgar Hoover. But there was a plot ongoing for a very, very long time to remove the FBI from J. Edgar Hoover, or to remove the FBI or take control of the FBI away from J. Edgar Hoover so that it could be politicized. Because prior to the death of J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI was largely non-political, and it was thanks, by and large, to the efforts of J. Edgar Hoover. But the left seized control of the FBI because the FBI, from the perspective of the left at the time, was a political sort of weapon of the American right. And it was J. Edgar Hoover who made it a point to refocus the FBI's efforts into cracking down on communism as opposed to this illusory menace that was American Nazism, to the chagrin of the American left. So anyway, I don't even know how I got here. We're going to move on. They married, meaning Barack Obama Sr. and Stanley Ann Dunham. They married in 1961. They separated in 1962. That didn't last long. They officially divorced in 1964. Now, remember, I talked about the Kenyatta-Obama connection, right? Jomo Kenyatta, who would eventually become the president of Kenya, and Jomo Kenyatta and his connection. to the Soviet Union. And of course, Paul Robeson knew Jomo Kenyatta personally, and he also knew Frank Marshall Davis personally. And Frank Marshall Davis may very well had known Obama Sr. personally. Now, allow me to explain. Now, it's weird because, see, when Barack Obama published his memoir, Dreams for My Father, in 1995, I don't know if Barack Obama knew exactly what was on the political horizon for him, because he really let a lot of cats out of the bag that he, quite frankly, I mean, once it was out, there was no way of putting it back in. And folks began to circle back when Barack Obama, I remember when he gave that speech at the Democrat National Convention, in what year was that? 2000, it was like the early 2000s. And I remember I got a phone call from my father, my dad. He called me, he said, son, he was all gung-ho, you know. Man, this dude, this Illinois senator, this guy named Barack Obama. He said, son, I mean, it wasn't necessarily anything like deeply prophetic in what he said. It just, you know, common observation. He said, son, that man gonna be president one day. He said, that's gonna be our first black president. That guy right there. My dad didn't even know who he was. He just was like, that guy gonna be president one day, right? And so, you know, again, it's I forgot why I even mentioned Barack Obama and him sort of giving that speech, but yeah, that's why, because, you know, who exactly knows what Barack Obama was thinking, you know, because he put out a lot of things that he perhaps should not have put out, and it was thanks to former communist turned investigative journalist Herb Romerstein. And then his investigative partner, whose first name escapes me, but Kincaid. The work of Romerstein and Kincaid helped to draw a lot of these links and put a lot of these things together, because in Barack Obama's own memoir, a lot of this stuff is cryptic, because if you go back and you read Dreams of My Father, Barack Obama never mentions Frank Marshall Davis's full name. He simply refers to him as Frank. And it was thanks to the investigative work of Romerstein and Kincaid that, you know, by and large, we were able to discover, but due to their research, by and large, we were able to discover exactly what Barack Obama was talking about. So a lot of this is almost like conjecture or presumption, considering the fact that a lot of times the only information that we have to work with is that a lot of these people were in the same sort of area. They were around each other at the same time, but we don't know exactly what brought them into contact. Jomo Kenyatta may very well have met Barack Obama Sr. and knew him personally as well. And the reason, again, why I felt the need to do a breakdown of Jomo Kenyatta in part one, because I at least wanted you all to get an understanding of the political environment that Barack Obama Sr. Was formed in. The New York Times, there was a New York Times article published in April of 1953 that actually referred to Jomo Kenyatta as a Soviet-trained terrorist, which he was. This is conventional knowledge. This is common wisdom. Again, he became the president of Kenya. Now, the connection between Kenyatta and Barack Obama Sr. is not lost on Barack Obama Jr. either. Obama Jr., in his memoir, Dreams for My Father, mentions Kenyatta nearly a dozen times in his own memoir. You all can go and read Dreams of My Father if you haven't read it already. Now, and it's kind of difficult to get through, because you know what a POS and a liar and how duplicitous Barack Obama is. But anyway, you do get a lot of good information in there, because he tells on himself a lot in the things that he says. While attending U of H, mind you, guess who else attended the University of Hawaii? Koji Oriyoshi. I mentioned him earlier. While attending U of H, Barack Obama Sr. would meet a fellow exchange student, an economics major from Cambodia named Tith. Now, this student that he befriended, who was a Cambodian national named Tith, of course, that's just his last name. I can't remember his full name because I don't know how to pronounce it, so I said I'm not even going to embarrass myself. His name is Tith. If you're interested in more, on some background into Barack Obama Sr. and his relationship with this Cambodian exchange student named Tith. Look into the research of Barack Obama Sr. biographer named Sally Jacobs. Anyway, I'm gonna quote from her research. She where I leave off. Yeah, so named Tith, who said of Barack Obama Sr., this is the Cambodian exchange student that Barack Obama Sr. knew. He says of Barack Obama Sr., quote, this is Tith, Obama and I were on opposite poles. I did not believe communism could save the world. It was too good to be true. And I gave examples of what I had seen. Barack Obama Sr. was the opposite. He was always glorying about communism, about how communism had liberated Africa and Cuba. He had no idea what communism was all about. For him, communism was going to save the world and capitalism was going to collapse. Again, you know, this is quite insightful of Tith because this was long before, as a Cambodian national, this was long before the Phnom Penh incident and the Cambodian genocide that began in 1975 in the reign of Pol Pot in the Khmer Rouge. And Dunham had a similar attitude toward American democracy and communism. Of course, this according to Barack Obama Sr. biographer, a woman by the name of Sally Jacobs. Now, it is not clear, and I alluded to this moments ago, that it is not clear when Davis, that is Frank Marshall Davis, met the Dunhams. We don't quite know when. He was just there one day, right? And we'll get into some of these stories, and a lot of these stories are from Barack Obama himself. It is quite possible that Davis knew Barack Obama Sr. as well. Barack Obama Sr., and this is the connection that we draw. Barack Obama Sr. once famously spoke at a peace rally in Ala Moana Park on the island of Oahu at the Mother's Day Peace Rally on May 13th, 1962, where he recited a fiery speech demanding that the United States reduce its military spending amidst the Cold War. It's always that, isn't it? The United States is always no fighting, no military, We don't need to spend taxpayer money buffering and enhancing the capabilities of our military. No. We need it in more government program. We need more social work, more welfare, more wealth and income redistribution, more property redistribution. We need more funding to go towards our schools and our this and our that. And we need to retrain our police and blah, 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 blah. Not military spending. No, that's one part. Listen. We know the left wants to increase the size of government ever more. They want to increase government spending ever more. And again, I know the Republicans have not been our friends when it comes to the deficit. This is not about partisanship here. But if you if you want the left to get on board with any type of cut in spending, talk about the military budget. Mind you, the left always talks about how, oh my God, our military is out of control. Man, please. And we spend about that much money on funding our military compared to all the money we waste on all this other shit. But if you want the left to get in line with decreasing the budget, talk about the military. Now, what organization do you reckon that's how I wrote it. What organization do you reckon was conspicuously present at this function? Well, of course, it was the ILWU. They were at this Mother's Day peace rally where Barack Obama Sr. delivered this speech. Even if you go to, I think the ILWU is still a functioning union, last time I checked. If you go to, they have pictures and photographs and things like that on their website. And at their headquarters, they're actually a kind of display that they have dedicated to, of course, the Obamas and whatever. And they actually have a photograph, and you can go and look up the photograph of Obama Sr. at this 1962 event where he's up at the podium giving this speech. And it's on the ILWU website. This is thought by some to be the place where Frank may have first met Barack Obama Sr., or perhaps where he met Ann Dunham herself. Now, I know that there's rumors out there that Frank Marshall Davis is Barack Obama's real father. I told you all in part one that I wasn't going to get into that much, because I you know, there's only so much time, and yeah, I'll let y'all dwell on that. Anyway. Frank even spoke about the presence of African exchange students at UH in his later memoirs. He even talks about perhaps Barack Obama Sr. himself, but we don't know because he doesn't mention him by name. He just talked about this striking, intelligent, well-spoken Kenyan exchange student who he, quote, says impregnated a pretty blonde woman before he went back to his native country. That may very well had been Barack Obama Sr., but we don't know because he doesn't mention him by name. But he does say that there were a ton of Kenyan exchange students at U of H at the time, who Frank Marshall Davis had a ton of admiration for. And the reason being is because of their radical politics. The Dunhams, as a family, now I felt the need to talk about this. It is widely documented were full-blown atheists by the 1960s, as was Frank Marshall Davis. I talked about that in part one, where Frank Marshall Davis abandoned his belief in God because God did not answer his prayers when it came to punishing the white race. In Barack Obama Jr.'s 2006 book, The Audacity of Hope, Barack Obama wrote, quote, "I was not raised in a religious household. My mother's own experiences only reinforced this inherited skepticism. Her memories of the Christians who populated her youth were not fond ones." Barack Obama Jr. also goes on in The Audacity of Hope that, quote, "Religion for her was just one of the many ways, and not necessarily the best way, that man attempted to control the unknowable and understand the deeper truths of our lives." Obama would later go on to say in December of 2007 to NBC journalist Aswani Anbarajan about the rumor that he is a closeted Muslim, quote, "My father was from Kenya and a lot of people in his village were Muslim. He, his father, didn't practice Islam. Truth is, he wasn't very religious." Of course he wouldn't be. He's a communist. "He met my mother. My mother was a Christian from Kansas. So I've always been a Christian. I've never practiced Islam." Now you see the duplicitous nature in Obama. You see what he does here. It's funny, too, because the rumors about Barack Obama not being an American citizen came out of his own camp, as a point of fact. And it's funny how they tried to say, well, anyone who questions Barack Obama's citizenship is a racist. This is what they tried to do to President Trump. But remember, the rumors and accusations about Barack Obama being a closeted Muslim and about Barack Obama being an Indonesian or Kenyan citizen or something of that nature was popularized first by his own Democratic rivals vying for the nomination in 2008, most notably Hillary Clinton. And she disguised her questioning or skepticism about Barack Obama's citizenship and other things. She disguised it by saying that you, Barack Obama Jr., should answer this question because most certainly if you are to, or if you were to gain the nomination, your Republican challenger is going to ask you these same questions. So you should do yourself a favor and address those concerns right here and now. It was Hillary Clinton who popularized or who first questioned Barack Obama's, I mean, you're talking from a perch of legitimacy. She was the first legitimate and widely respected individual, according to the mainstream and according to conventional knowledge, to question Barack Obama's citizenship. It wasn't Donald Trump. But notice how Hillary Clinton gets a pass. I remember it specifically. But nevertheless, see how funny he is. Now, first he says in 2006 that he didn't grow up in a religious household. He inherited this kind of religious skepticism by his mom, who was not a practicing Christian. Now, fast forward in 2007, in the lead up to the 2008 election, he knows that he has to feign some sort of allegiance to the Christian faith if he is to become president of the United States. Again, I don't knock him for lying. Politicians lie all the time. Democrats, Republicans, they all lie. But again, Barack Obama didn't do himself any favors by releasing these quasi-tell-all memoirs. Now, Ann Dunham's best friend in high school, a woman by the name of Maxine Box, said to a Chicago Tribune reporter named Tim Jones in March of 2007 that Ann, quote, touted herself an atheist, and it was something she'd read about and could argue. So according to Stanley Ann Dunham's best friend, Maxine Box, she was, in fact, an atheist. While Maya Sotoro, Ann Dunham's daughter, the sister of Barack Obama, said of her mother, I wouldn't have called her an atheist. She was an agnostic. She basically gave us all the good books and wanted us to recognize that everyone has something beautiful to contribute. So I wanted to say all of that because, again, go back to, I'm shamelessly plug again, if you all are interested, this is your first time seeing me on any type of platform, I advise you to go and check out my other YouTube upload titled Silence of the Bells, The Origins of Woke. And I know I'm preaching to the choir because this is a smart audience, and you all know that that atheism is prerequisite for communism. That's just the way it is. I love the story that the great patriot and hero Whittaker Chambers, the story that he tells, because Whittaker Chambers grew up he grew up in a conservative household. He was staunchly religious. He had faith. He was a believer. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, chat, didn't Whittaker Chambers, didn't he attend the University of Columbia? I always talk about the University of Columbia because it is a breeding ground of all sorts of freaks and reprobates and malcontents. But I think Whittaker Chambers attended the University of Columbia. If not, he went somewhere, and it was there where Whittaker Chambers was atheized. He abandoned his faith in God, became an atheist, and then his atheism is what led him into the communist orbit ideologically. It led him into communism, was his atheism. And the same is true almost of every communist. They are first atheists, or at some point in time they become atheists. Even famous communists such as Leon Trotsky, who was, of course, an ethnic Jew, but nevertheless, he was a practicing atheist who inherited atheism from his father. Who, by the way, this is Leon Trotsky. His father, although his father was religious, his father was not a political radical. And, when Leon Trotsky was radicalized by the woman who would soon become his wife, his family disowned him for his radical political views. This is Leon Trotsky. Anyway, another tangent, because y'all know I'm scatterbrained. So let's get to when I'm almost closing out, y'all. Let's get back to the story of when Harry met Sally, when Obama met Frank. Let's talk about it. And it all centers around the story of the Black Panhandler. Those of you who are familiar with the story and the background of Obama, Frank Marshall Davis, you probably heard the story of the Black Panhandler. Let's get into it. So I'm going to acknowledge something. I skipped Ann's second marriage to Lolo Sotoro. That marriage lasted until 1980. And Barack Obama's time in Indonesia. Well, he was in Indonesia until about the early 1970s. He was sent back to Hawaii by his mother to live with his grandparents. What Obama was doing in Indonesia, what was life like when his mom was married to Lolo, and all these things. It's worth talking about, it's worth considering, but for the sake of time, I just excluded that whole portion. I just wanted to get back to Hawaii, so there you have it. Again, guys, this is part 2. I said I'm probably going to do a part 3 because I didn't even get to Barack Obama's time in New York when he moved to Columbia, where it is believed that he may have first encountered Bill Ayers there in New York as opposed to Chicago, because we know that Bill Ayers and Barack Obama were closely connected, particularly through the Annenberg Fund, but we don't know exactly when Barack Obama and Bill Ayers met, but we know they met at some point. And so it's pretty much up in the air as to when that meeting initially occurred. And we also know that the wife of Bill Ayers, Bernadine Dorn, was working at the same law firm as Michelle Obama. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself because all that stuff will be outlined in part 3 if you all aren't familiar with that history. But anyway, that's if y'all want me to do a part 3. Anyway, moving on. I just skipped Indonesia entirely. Let's get back to Hawaii. So Barack Obama Jr. at the time was still referred to himself as Barry. By, as you tell people, because, of course, Barack Obama's a weird sounding name, so he liked to be called Barry, was suffering from what I myself call the Kaepernick syndrome due to a lack of the lack of a black male role model for him to connect with. This is Barack Obama's own description, right? Because he was being raised by his white grandparents, and being a biracial child, he felt somewhat empty. He was longing for some sort of connection with a black male role model, or just a black role model of any kind, for that matter. This is Barack Obama's own sentiments. At this point, the young Obama only had the letters of his father to lean on for any sort of black masculine connection. Of course, part of what helped to cement the bond between Frank Marshall Davis and Barack Obama was the fact that Barack Obama was biracial. And as I outlined in part 1, for those of you who did not know, Frank Marshall Davis's wife was white, and Frank Marshall Davis himself had biracial children. It's funny how all these militant types, but again, as a communist, I guess, they have no respect of race. But anyway, of course, he leaned into the whole racism thing. You would think, these leftists, these black leftists, they always, the what they say, the white man's ice is colder. Obama noted in his 1995 memoir that his grandfather had a fair slate of black male friends that he played cards with. A young Obama would attend these card game gatherings with his grandfather, where his grandfather's black friends were always pleasant when greeting him, but once the games began, Obama went ignored for the duration of the gathering, except for one man, a poet named Frank. This is how Barack Obama would describe him, a poet named Frank. As time went on, it became routine for Obama and his grandfather, Stanley, to visit Davis to sit around, drink whiskey, read poetry, and tell dirty jokes about women. And this is notorious. Frank Marshall Davis was notorious for his sort of crude and lewd remarks, and even in his own literature, when it came to his attitudes and his beliefs about women or whatnot. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but Frank Marshall Davis wrote a memoir under a pseudonym that was published sometime during the 1930s called Black Rebel. And then he would come along later, maybe in his other 1944, I think it was the year, memoir titled Living the Blues, where he admitted that he was, in fact, the author of Black Rebel. And in Black Rebel, he details all of his sexual exploits, even a sexual relationship that he had with a 13-year-old. This is Frank Marshall Davis. Anyway, so he was a bit of a pornographer as well, and we all know anyway. So again, at this time, I talked to Ann Dunham and Barack Obama Sr., right? The meeting up between the three of them at Hawaii. Again, Frank Marshall Davis may very well need to, or perhaps somebody should call the Maury Povich show so we can get to the bottom of this. Obama would state in his autobiography that he knew Frank was, and I'm paraphrasing here, enjoyed some notoriety in his early life. He doesn't quite see, here's the thing. Barack Obama was not dishonest enough to the point where he would be willing to leave Frank Marshall Davis out of his memoir completely. He did not have the gall to do such a thing to a man who had played such a big role in his development in his teenage years. He couldn't bear the thought of doing that. But he knew very well who Frank Marshall Davis was, about Frank Marshall Davis's past. And that's why I believe that he neglected to mention Frank Marshall Davis by his name in full. Because he knew Frank Marshall Davis was a member of the Communist Party. He even cited, this is Barack Obama Jr., he even cited Frank Marshall Davis's connections to his literary counterparts, Richard Wright and Langston Hughes, who too were both members of the Communist Party. So Barack Obama knew. Now, the story of the black panhandler. Let me get to this. Let me run through this. Obama's grandmother, Madeline, that he referred to as Toot, had a dispute with Barack Obama's grandfather, who he referred to as Gramps, over whether Gramps should give Toot a ride to work after she had been threatened at a bus stop by a black panhandler. Now, according to Obama's account, the issue as he perceived it centered around the race of the beggar, not the reality of the person simply being a beggar. You get what I'm saying? So it's not that she was being accosted and hassled by a random stranger at a bus stop. The fact that the person was black made it, I guess, doubly concerning. And so, troubled by his grandparents' racist behavior, Obama sought out the counsel of Frank, because this was the first time, according to Obama, that he witnessed his grandparents engaging in what he perceived to be, I guess, sort of like, you know, sort of racist attitudes. It troubled him. So he wanted to figure out exactly, or process exactly how, you know, what should he feel about, what should he think about this? Here is Frank Marshall Davis's words to a young Obama. Listen to what he says to him. You can't blame Stan for what he is. He's basically a good man. What I'm trying to tell you, I'm skipping around because Frank Marshall Davis goes into how he and Stanley were both raised in Kansas, although they didn't meet, according to Frank Marshall Davis. He never met Barack Obama Jr.'s grandfather, but they did grow up about 50 miles apart. And he goes and talks about how back in his day, when a white man was walking, you know, how he would have to walk on the street, he would have to step off the sidewalk and all this crap, right? So anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is your grandfather has a right to be scared. She's at least, no, I'm sorry, not grandfather, your grandmother. Let me read that again. What I'm trying to tell you is your grandma is right to be scared. She's at least as right as Stanley is. She understands that black people have a reason to hate. That's just how it is. For your sake, I wish it were otherwise, but it is not. So you might as well get used to it. Black people have a reason to hate. Right. So you see what they're gearing up for? They're seeing how they are going to use, you know, blacks as some sort of you see how blacks are used politically to, and not just blacks exclusively, but I'm simply saying, you see how easy and, blacks are just ripe for the pickings for this sort of manipulation, because we are easy to identify as the other based solely upon our aesthetic. This is my contention. It may be overly simplistic for many of you, but I think blacks have an inherent fear of assimilation. And so this is why we are easily manipulated and duped by our black intelligentsia, who are statists, the same kinds of statists as their white counterparts. This is why ideology has no respect to race. But blacks have a right to hate. You see how they're gearing black people up to be some sort of, some kind of vigilante sort of force in the United States. And the wider society is expected to just sit there and take it because we have a reason to hate. This is propaganda. See how the cycle, see how they keep this going? Pardon my French, especially on a Sunday, but that's bullshit. Especially if blacks want to preen and prance around like they hold the moral high ground because they are somehow superior to their recessive counterparts. Well, to whom given much is required. So it behooves you to be better because God commands you to forgive. And contrary to what these blacktivists tell you, any fool could lash out. Any fool can have an emotional tirade to a perceived affront. But it takes a man, or a woman for that matter. When I say man, I'm speaking humankind in general. It takes courage and strength to forgive. Any fool can retaliate, but it takes courage to forgive. Obama remarked that he walked away from that conversation realizing for the first time that, quote, I was alone. And it was from that point that Obama felt closer to Obama felt closer to Davis than his own biological grandfather. Let's start to set the radical wheels in motion for young Obama. Obama's connection to Davis would continue to grow, seeing the two sit down for conversations several more times before perhaps the second most seminal exchange between them would occur. When Obama would visit Davis before moving to Los Angeles to enroll in Occidental College in 1979. I think I said 1981 in the first part, but I couldn't remember. But it's that year, the year of 79 to 80. About what Obama should expect from his college experience. At this point, Obama was just going through the motions. He thought college was just something that you do. But, you know, he wasn't necessarily too gung-ho about it. And he didn't know what lay ahead of him in the future. So he went to Frank Marshall Davis. Frank says, this is his remarks to a young Obama. They train you so good that you'll start believing what they tell you about equal opportunity and the American way and all that shit. You may be a well-trained, well-paid nigger, but you're a nigger just the same. Wow. What inspiration. Way to go, Frank. What a message to give to a young, impressionable mind going into the world. That no matter how well-trained you are, no matter how well-paid you are, you ain't shit but a nigga. Frank Marshall Davis is all of about 80-some years old at this point. And this is what he's telling a young Obama. And so, this is the lasting lesson Obama would take into his college sojourn. And what of Obama in college? Well, for that, let's turn to the words of Dr. John C. Drew. Some of you all are probably familiar with Dr. John C. Drew, but if you aren't, I'm gonna go into him a bit. And we're rounding the bend, y'all. I'm at 2 hours and 15 minutes, and we're gonna round it off. Who is Dr. John C. Drew? He was born February 5th, 1957 in Glendale, California. Dr. John Drew earned his PhD in government from Cornell and has taught political science and economics at Cornell, Hope International University, the University of Oregon, and Williams College. Today, Dr. Drew remains active in political and economic matters and is an occasional contributor to some of the most notable conservative publications in the country, including The American Thinker, Breitbart, Campus Reform, PJ Media, The College Fix, Front Page Magazine, and WorldNet Daily. Now, let's rewind a bit when it comes to Dr. Drew. Back in 1975, Dr. Drew received an athletic scholarship in track to attend Occidental College. And yes, he knew Barack Obama. Now, I just want to give this a little tidbit. I thought this was an interesting story. One of Dr. Drew's last professorships took place at Williams College, where he was virtually run out by students and administrators when he was denied tenure. This is why I don't think he teaches anymore. He was denied tenure once a group of conservative students looking for campus support discovered that Dr. Drew was only one of 3 Republicans on a faculty of approximately 100. For those of my math and my arithmetic illiterate folks out there, that's 3%. 3% of William College's faculty were registered Republicans, and the trend can be found all across our American university archipelago. Same deal. They have been completely rooted out and bred out. Is that Dr. Drew from the Man Show? Shoot, I don't know, man. I don't know. You mean like the old Man Show with Kimmel and Carol? What's his name? I don't know. He might have been on there. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. So again, these conservative students were looking for. He might have been on there. I don't know. He was sought out by conservative students because they were looking for support from some kind of because we see the campus, the Sovietization of the American campus, right? These Bolsheviks on our American campuses, and so anyway, they were looking for support, and they discovered that Drew was, in fact, one of very few Republicans. And so it wasn't purposeful, but they sort of outed him as a conservative. And from there, his teaching career was over. And just as a swift aside real quick, just a few months ago, I found this article online. It was very interesting because I didn't catch this story, but it happens all too often. So it wasn't really a big deal. A Christian monument was vandalized at Williams College by someone who wrote the words "Hail Satan" on the Christian monument at Williams College. So I'll just go to show you the state of Williams College today, that they are vandalizing Christian monuments with the words "Hail Satan." Now, Dr. Drew, now a staunch conservative, is a recovering Marxist who was a founding member of the Political Awareness Fellowship, a Marxist student organization, as an undergrad at Occidental. Now, let's hear what Dr. Drew has said over the years about his one-time friend and comrade. Now, I'm going to read you this story, and I'm gone. In 1980, Dr. John Drew, he wasn't a doctor then, but in 1980, John Drew was a second-year graduate student, then 23 years old, was dating another Occidental student who was 21 years old, a woman named Caroline Boss, who had met and befriended Obama, then Barry, in a political theory class. Dr. Drew met Obama at Caroline Boss's home that year, shortly before the new year. This is 1980. This is what Dr. Drew recalls of the meeting. I had been an angry, and I'm taking excerpts because he goes into great detail. I just took the parts that I thought were really pertinent. I had been an angry Marxist revolutionary during my undergraduate career at Occidental College. During my hyperactive sophomore year, in the fall of 1976, I founded the Marxist Socialist Group on campus and named it the Political Awareness Fellowship. As I recall, I had developed this innocuous-sounding name because there were so few students on campus as radical as I, and I was fearful of turning off moderate students who might be willing to learn more about Marxist theory. This is how they do. This is how they do in general, right? They give these vague, moderate-sounding names like the Committee for Rights and this is civil rights, and they love civil rights, social justice, this kind of justice. This, that. And so anytime if you're well versed in this sort of, what we're talking about here, these sort of things don't escape you. The moment you hear the name of an organization, you say, yep, that's a Marxist organization. They give it away. It's in the name. The Political Awareness Fellowship, that's a Marxist organization. But if you're never the wiser if you aren't sensitive to this kind of thing. When I first saw Obama, I remember standing on the porch of Boss's parents' impressive home as a sleek, expensive luxury car pulled up to the driveway. 2 young men emerged from the vehicle. They were well dressed and looked like they were born to wealth and privilege. I was a little surprised to learn they were Boss's friends from Occidental College until she articulated the underlying political connection. They're on our side, she said. This is Barack Obama, Boss said. I remember I looked up at Obama as we shook hands. I was completely mystified by the pronunciation of his name. He did not put up a fight over it, however. You can call me Barry, Obama said. My graduate studies that fall had tempered my earlier Marxism with a more realistic perspective. Now listen to this. I thought a revolution was not in the cards anymore. There was no inevitability in my mind to the old idea that the proletariat would rise up and overthrow the ruling classes. Now the idea that we could entirely eliminate the profit motive from an advanced industrialized economy seemed like childhood fantasy. The future I now thought would belong to nations with mixed economic systems, like those in Europe, where there was government planning of the economy combined with a greater effort to produce more equitable distribution of wealth. Doesn't that sound like the modern day Democrat Party platform, ladies and gentlemen? It made more sense to me to focus on elections rather than on preparing for a coming revolution. Boss and Obama, however, had a starkly different view. They believed that the economic stresses of the Carter years meant revolution was imminent. The election of Reagan was simply a minor setback in terms of the coming revolution. As I recall, Obama repeatedly used the phrase, when the revolution comes. In my mind, I remember thinking that Obama was blindly sticking to the simple Marxist theory that had characterized my own views while I was an undergraduate at Occidental College. There's going to be a revolution, Obama said. We need to be organized and grow the movement. In Obama's view, our role might be to educate others so that we might usher in more quickly this inevitable revolution. I know this may be implausible to some readers, but I distinctly remember Obama surprising me by bringing up Frantz Fanon and colonialism. I did that last time. He impressed me with his knowledge of these two topics which were not among my strong points or of overwhelming concern to me. Drawing on the history of Western Europe, I responded it was unrealistic to think the working class would ever overthrow the capitalist system. I recall Obama reacting negatively to my criticism, saying, "You're crazy." Since I was a Marxist myself at the time and had studied variations in Marxist theory, I can state that everything I heard Obama argue that evening was consistent with Marxist philosophy, including the ideas that class struggle was leading to an inevitable revolution, that an elite group of revolutionaries was needed to lead the effort. It had not been a true Marxist-Leninist. If he had not been a true Marxist-Leninist, I would have noticed and remembered. I can still, with some degree of ideological precision, identify which students at Occidental College were radicals and which ones were not. By the time the debate came to an end, Obama, although not Boss, were making peace, agreeing with the facts I had laid out, and demonstrating an apparent agreement with more realistic perspective. I have vivid memory of Obama surrendering to my argument, including signaling to the somewhat bewildered Chandu. Chandu was the gentleman who Barack Obama rode with when, Obama was with this gentleman Chandu, and the two of them are the two that arrived at the home of Caroline Boss. And Chandu, I think his father, they were wealthy. He came from a wealthy Indian family. A bewildered Chandu, through his voice and body language, that the argument had concluded and it was decided in my favor. Drew said, I won the argument. Listen to this. I treasured this particular memory as an early example of my own intellectual growth and an early sign of my moderate promise as a teacher. At the time, I had the impression that I might have been one of the first to directly challenge Obama's Marxist-Leninist mindset. Whatever impact our encounter might have had on him, I know something about what Barack Obama believed in 1980. At the time, the future president was a doctrinaire Marxist revolutionary, although perhaps for the first time, considered conventional politics as a more practical road to socialism. And that's it, y'all. I'm going to leave y'all on that cliffhanger. And I will be back for part 3 if you all are interested and want to hear. That was the moment, according to conservative writer, intellectual Dr. John Drew, and he wrote of all of this years and years ago. And very few people would listen to what Dr. John Drew had to say. He went largely ignored. He's one of the very few people who knew Barack Obama in his earlier years who are willing to detail who Barack Obama was and what he was like back then. And so there you have it. That was the first time that Barack Obama thought to himself, you know what? Maybe revolution's not the way to go. Maybe it's politics. And the rest, as they say, is history. Or should I say, it's the present, because we're still in the throes of it today. So, thank y'all for joining me. Please like, subscribe, share, do all those YouTube things. Thank you, IG, for tuning in. Do me a favor, when it shows up on YouTube in a couple of days, heck, man, watch it again if you want, whatever. But go and do me a favor and subscribe and hit the like button for me and leave a comment, all right? Y'all, thanks for joining me this early on a Sunday. I missed church this morning to come in here and be with you guys. So I hope you enjoyed the information that I've laid out here today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Peace out, y'all.